So welcome to the surgery. Let's get cracking because we've had a bit of a delay. So as before, this will be the kind of last surgery where we'll have to use this system. But in terms of kind of interaction, if you guys can go onto slido.com, um, so that's SLIDO, and it'll ask you for a sort of hashtag, and it'll be hashtag 6med. And I've just activated a poll for you guys there, which will kind of tell me where you guys are sort of at for verbal reasoning. And also that's where you can post your questions for the kind of Q&A bits. Um, and that's pretty good because you can kind of upvote questions. And so I know what kind of most people want to know. And then if there are any questions that I don't manage to get through, if you can send that to team@6med.co.uk. From the next surgery, we'll finally have sort of webinar functionality on Zoom. And so we'll be able to do the Q&A actually on Zoom. But yeah. So again, that's slido.com and use the hashtag 6med. And there's a poll there for you guys to kind of fill out. And can you guys let me know if you can see my slide as well? So it should say 6med surgery on it. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, let me see. Can you just fill out the poll? Okay, so we've got a few people filling it out. You might be able to see that, but so oh, we've got someone who's very confident, which is awesome. That's good. But most people, as I sort of expected for this time, are sort of at the sort of starting point of kind of you maybe know what verbal reasoning kind of entails. You maybe know what sort of question types there are. But what I'm going to do today is basically just introduce the section. So it's a section of the UCAT. And I'm going to kind of talk about what the question types are, and then I've got two example questions for you. I made them myself. I kind of based them on questions in the sort of official UCAT question bank in terms of their structure, but the actual content itself I made myself. So it'll be sort of representative, but obviously bear in mind, I'm not an official question setter. And I tried to make them a sort of mixture of some of them are a bit easier, some of them are harder. So we'll kind of go through those. But yeah, let's move on. So in terms of me, so here are my kind of stats because people always ask about that. So I'm a medical student at Cambridge. I'm the 6med ACE ambassador. And as part of my kind of medicine journey, I did both the UCAT and the BMAT. So that's why I've been doing this sort of stuff for 6med for quite a while now, as well as kind of masterclass videos. And I'm currently filming some very exciting videos for you guys, which will be kind of filtered out very soon. So yeah. I found the UCAT as a whole a pretty kind of it was an okay experience. There wasn't really much in the way of resources when I did it, so I pretty much just used the book, which is not ideal at all because not only is the actual exam online, but also the book, especially now, is kind of outdated and not particularly user friendly. So all of these kind of question banks, the UCAT Ninja and all of these things are a much better resource. So yeah, I'd sort of recommend whether you use a 6med product or not, I'd recommend using something that's kind of got that online interface for it, and just kind of go through the questions. So yeah, if you want to kind of know what other things I've done for 6med, then feel free to just ask me in terms of other resources and things which aren't always that easy to find. So I'll go through kind of verbal reasoning today. I'll hopefully be able to answer your questions, which you can put onto Slido. The questions can be about anything relating to the medicine application, so not just verbal reasoning. Um, it can be kind of personal statement, interview, UCAT, BMAT, what it's like to be a medical student, anything at all. But obviously bear in mind, the more kind of niche your question is, the lower it'll probably be in terms of the list, because not too many other people will upvote it. So that's kind of how that will work. And as I said, I've got some example questions for you guys, which I think will be pretty good practice. So in terms of verbal reasoning, to kind of summarize it, it's words. It's you'll get a sort of passage. And let me just set my timer ready for the questions before I forget. Yeah, so it's essentially, you'll get a passage, and then they will ask you questions based on that passage. It's probably the most time pressured section, which, even though there are other sections that have kind of less, in terms of time per question, this one is probably the most time pressured, because if you don't sort of have a system that you practice, it will take a really, really long time to go through each of the questions. And I'll kind of give you some tips along the way as to how you can actually make yourself more time efficient with this. Um, so it'll be the first section you go through. So, the first few questions, you'll be kind of working through the nerves a little bit. You'll be sort of having that internal panic of, okay, this is it, this is the moment. Remember to try and prepare just in the minute before you start the test, and just sort of compose yourself and get back into the mind frame of what you've been doing while you've been practicing. So it's 44 questions. The way it's split up is, so you have 11 kind of passages of text. So 11 kind of bits of information, and then you have 4 questions for each of these. And that's probably a good way to think about it in terms of splitting up your time, because it's 11 passages and it's 21 minutes. So it's just under 2 minutes per passage, and then each passage is going to have 4 questions allocated to it. And so you can see from that, that's going to be pretty time pressured. Obviously, the benefit of it being multiple questions per passage is that later questions, you may not even need to reread the passage, or kind of reskim it, because you may remember from a previous part. But yeah, that's kind of the sort of setup. Also, as an aside, we are making the slides and the recordings available, so don't worry about kind of writing all of this down. Um, so yeah, just as a general sort of summary of the section. So as I said, 11 passages, each with 4 questions, therefore a total of 44 questions. And the way they kind of test it, I've tried to summarize at the bottom there. There are 2 sort of main ways in which they do this. One way is they'll sort of write a statement or a question, or they'll kind of start a statement, and then you have to select from one of 4 options. And they tend to be more difficult if it's things like talking about things you can infer from the passage, or if each of the answer options are kind of a statement, then that'll take much longer than if each of the answer options are just a single word, for example. Um, the other main question type is the true, false, can't tell. And this is one that students tend to struggle with a lot, because I think it's important to really get the definition straight in your head. So with the verbal reasoning section, you're not supposed to use any prior assumed knowledge. So in other words, if the passage that you have, there's a statement saying, an apple is not a fruit. Now we know, based on our own kind of knowledge, an apple is a fruit. But if the passage says an apple is not a fruit, and the question said, true or false or can't tell, an apple is a fruit, you would have to answer based on the passage and not on your own knowledge. And so true means the text itself states somewhere that that statement is true. False means in the passage somewhere it is stated clearly that that statement is false. And can't tell is when there's nothing in the statement that says definitively whether something is true or false. So it's not based on your own knowledge. And also, people tend to get a little bit confused with the can't tell part. So just ask yourself, is this statement directly addressed in the question? Or is it, something that's not really mentioned, but kind of either implied at some stage, or they talk about a sort of peripheral statement that's not directly related to it. And that's the kind of key point about that question type. And once you begin to understand that, it actually becomes a lot easier to answer those questions. But that's the type of kind of thinking that I think a lot of students tend to struggle with, mainly because no one really actually explains the differences between them, which is a bit unfortunate. Um, so yeah, so we're going to launch straight into the first example question. So I've given a little bit more than the standard amount of time, because I know most people won't have kind of done many questions before. So I'll give you 2 minutes. So it'll be one passage. So there are 4 questions attached to it. And what I'll do is I'll set a 2-minute timer. And when it comes to 1 minute, I'll just switch to the next slide, which will be exactly the same paragraphs, but just the next 2 questions, if that makes sense. So I'll give you guys kind of a bit of time to prepare, and make sure you have something to kind of write down your answers as well. I will go through the answers afterwards. But yeah, let me just check Slido while I give you guys time to prepare. Okay, so yeah, so most people are kind of at the basic stage. So it's absolutely fine if you completely, have no clue what to do with this question, because what I'll do is I'll give some tips, and then a bit later on we'll do the second question, and you can start to put them into practice and hopefully see that they're effective. But I will start the timer in 3, 2, 1. On to the next step. Last 5 seconds. And that's it. That's time. So yeah, obviously feel free to keep going on those questions if you want. But just so you know, that is a little bit more time than you'd have in the actual exam to answer those 2 questions. So if you haven't done any questions before, I've purposely made it a bit, sort of we've just kind of launched straight into it, to show you that if this is kind of your approach, where you just kind of just go through questions and try and brute force it, you're going to get overwhelmed quite quickly, because when you're presented with all of this text, it's probably a bit sort of, it'll make you panic a bit. And then you end up kind of reading through the passage, trying to understand it. And then you'll go to the question, forget kind of things that you just read, and go back and keep kind of flicking back and forth. If anyone wants to kind of let me know how they felt with those questions, feel free to pop it in the chat, because I tried to kind of pitch this at a sort of standard UCAT level, with some harder and some easier questions as well. But we will go through the answers now, so hopefully you kind of noted down your answers. Does anyone want me to go back to the first and second questions? If you want to kind of guess or something like that, just let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I'll crack on. Okay, so let's go through the answers. So the first part, so this is where the first tip comes in. It's really tempting to read the passage first, but what I would suggest is either go straight to the questions, or if you have to read the passage, just skim it so you know just what subject it's on. So you would kind of skim this really quickly and think, okay, it's on exercise, and then in your mind you're thinking, okay, this is about exercise. And then you're going to go to the question stem, and you want to figure out what type of question is this. So this says, according to the passage, which of the following is correct? So okay, you need to see which of these statements are kind of directly addressed and confirmed within the passage. And next, you're going to look for the keywords in the answer stems. So I've kind of underlined what the kind of main keywords are. And so what you want to do is look for these keywords in the text and then read the sentence around it. So I've put kind of, what you would sort of look for. So you kind of go look at that and think, okay, treadmill, grass, and we're looking to compare them. And then you'd go to the kind of text, you'd skim, and you can see at the end of the second paragraph there, it mentions the word treadmill. So you'd then read that sentence fully, and it says running on softer ground, such as grass, is better for joints than running on hard ground or a treadmill. And so you can see that directly opposes the statement. And so 1A must be incorrect. And so you do that for each of them. And obviously, if you're lucky, A or B will be the correct one, and you won't even need to answer the others. For this one, C was the correct one. And I've kind of highlighted in bold there the sentence that would have kind of pertained to that. And so that one was a little bit more difficult because it was sort of not directly stated in terms of the keywords. It was kind of a conclusion made from the statement. So that first part was a more difficult question, especially because the answer options are all statements, and so it's going to take you longer to kind of go through it. And then go on to the second part. So just to confirm, for number 1, C was the correct answer. The second part, so again, I've underlined the key points, and here it's slightly different because not only do we have the 3 options, but we also have the actual answer stem is the statement itself. So we only need to look for the keywords once here. So I've put cycling, joints, and swimming. And you can see there it says low impact exercise such as cycling and swimming, yada, 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 without damaging joints. So this says that both of them can be used without kind of damaging joints. It doesn't say which is more likely, and therefore we can't tell whether this is true or false. And hopefully you can kind of understand how that works. And if you kind of have any questions about that, feel free to ask me. But there's no way we can tell based on the information we've given which of these will be better or worse for joint health. It just kind of lumps them both together and talks about them together. And that's quite a common thing they'll do. They'll use things like more or less likely, most likely, these sort of qualifiers and absolutes. And they'll often put them kind of in the context of talking about things together. So you actually can't tell which is better or which is worse. So that's a kind of key thing that they do. So that one, C, was correct. We then go on to the next part. So which of the following is the author most likely to agree with? Now, these ones are a bit more difficult, again, because they tend to be more kind of summarizing things that the author has said, as opposed to, absolute keywords. So this one, hopefully you will have read the first statement and thought, okay, well, that's something I can kind of look at. So do they mention kind of, different uses of exercise? And so you'd see the very first sentence talks about physical rehabilitation. And then it then goes on to kind of talking about kind of younger people who like to do jogging. And then it goes on to talk about kind of other benefits like autonomy and improving mental health. So hopefully you will have kind of seen the first statement. Seems like it could be right, but obviously realistically, you're going to read the subsequent statements in an exam setting. If you were really pressed for time, if you read a statement like A and think that sounds about right, and you're running out of time, I would go ahead and kind of guess that one, flag the question, and then move on to the next one. And that's another kind of general UCAT tip that I could kind of give. So yeah, and you can kind of go through the other statements and see why they're not correct. So B is obviously not correct because it talks about older people and joint health, and high impact exercise is bad for joint health. C, people should never do high impact exercises. Well, it says if you have kind of proper running mechanics, footwear, and recovery, then it should be okay. And then D, so young people should only do yoga and Pilates to build up their confidence. So again, they'll use things like only, never, always, these kind of absolute terms, which are often used to kind of confuse things. So yeah, A is correct there. And in the final part, again, here we can look at the kind of key words in the actual answer statement and then look for them in the paragraph. So we're looking for high impact and we're looking for health issues. So we kind of skim the paragraphs and we see health issues there in the second paragraph, and then you'd read the whole sentence. And the whole sentence says, without proper running mechanics, footwear, and recovery, there may be health issues in later life. So it says without these things, you might get issues, but that kind of tells you that if you do have these things, you may not get issues. And therefore, we can say that this statement is true. So that's the first example question. Yeah, if you have any kind of questions on anything I've talked about here, then please do let me know. But this is a relatively realistic kind of style, and obviously, you can kind of see how you would use the keywords to more efficiently go through the paragraph. You're looking for keywords. I've got some kind of tips on some good keywords that are kind of easy to find. And this is a much better system than kind of reading through the paragraphs first of all, going to the questions, having to go back and read again, and just kind of wasting time reading things and not really taking it in because you're kind of panicking about being able to answer the questions. So we're going to go to the Q&A bit now. So if you want to pop your questions on Slido, and I'll see if there are any at the moment. There aren't any at the moment. So yeah, if you guys can put your questions down. Again, these can relate to anything about the kind of application process, or about the UCAT, etc. I'll set a timer. I might set it for a little bit less time, so we have more time for the question later on. But yeah, again, that's going on slido.com and using the hashtag 6med, and then you can use the audience Q&A to send questions and upvote other people's questions. And also, so I know some people may not have access to Slido, but I have to sort of prioritize the Slido questions because I know kind of people have upvoted them. So feel free to kind of send me a question on Zoom, but I'll have to kind of answer the Slido ones first, so I may not get around to it. So yeah, so we've got one so far. We've got a couple. And yeah, if you can, if you see a question that you want to be answered, if you can vote it up, so that I kind of know what you guys want. And yeah, we will start to get through these. Give just another minute or so, and then I'll start answering questions. Okay, so we've got a couple on kind of 2 upvotes. If we can get some tiebreakers, please. We can get get people upvoting the questions, and then I'll get started on that. Okay, so let's start with that one about the personal statement. So, okay, it's now been overtaken, but anyway. So yeah, the personal statement is definitely a significant kind of focus of anxiety for students. I think because it's not really much space. There aren't really, too many words, and you feel like you have to cram absolutely everything into it. So, in terms of general tips, I would say first of all, um, start by writing down absolutely everything you can think of that relates to your medicine application that you've done, anything at all. And then what you want to do is make a table of all of these things, and you want to talk about what actual value it brings to your application. So is it something that shows your interest in medicine? Has it given you more insight into the career? Does it demonstrate particular skills? The sort of normal ones like communication and teamwork and empathy and these sorts of things. And once you've built up this kind of database, that's actually kind of a significant chunk of the work done, because the main mistake people make is not actually writing the personal statement as a way to show your suitability for the course and for the profession. Instead of just kind of stating what you've done, you need to actually reflect on it. So I have written a series of blog posts for SixMed which is kind of taking you through the beginning of the personal statement, some of the main mistakes and that sort of thing. So do kind of have a look at that. But yeah, in terms of getting started, so you want it to basically be, kind of 3/4 talking about sort of academics and achievements and that sort of thing, and then a quarter talking about, sort of hobbies and that part. So you want to start off with, your sort of motivations for medicine. It can be, as personal as you like, as long as it's truthful and is not, more kind of style over substance. I personally started mine off talking about antibiotic resistance and MRSA. And I talked about that because not only was it a good summary of my interest in medicine, but also it linked to my EPQ and some of the reading I'd done. So if you can try and link stuff together as well, that's quite useful. But yeah, so you start off with kind of your main kind of motivations for medicine, link into what you've kind of done. Then the main bulk of it is going to be talking about your work experience, your reading, your projects, these sorts of things. And the key point here is not to just state things you've done. You have to actually talk about how did it differ from what you thought, what did you learn from it. It's always good to mention particular encounters that you've had either with patients or with people in general that have kind of made you kind of either adapt your behavior or something you've learned from, something you didn't expect. These are all the really important things that they want to see. If there was someone who had lots and lots of work experience and said, I went to a renal ward at Addenbrooke's Hospital. I spent 2 weeks there. I got to see peritoneal dialysis and people with chronic kidney injury on hemofiltration, and all of these kind of just statements. It doesn't actually tell them that much, even though it might sound impressive in terms of things they got to see. It doesn't tell you anything at all about that person's suitability to be a medical student, and have they actually done any reflection on it. So that's the most important thing. And you definitely don't have to do lots and lots of things as long as you're reflecting on what you have done. That's absolutely the most important thing. And then, yeah, don't forget the things like hobbies and personal interests, even if you're applying to Oxbridge. I sort of met my first year supervisor, and he was actually one of my interviewers. And the first thing he remembered about me was that I was a self-taught drummer, and that was in my kind of hobbies and interest bit. It wasn't any of my academic information, because students will have pretty much the same kind of achievements and things. It'll be the more sort of unique, the more interesting things that build you up as a person, including Oxbridge and London universities. So yeah, that's a bit of a messy answer, but I tried to pack in as many kind of tips as I could in there. And as I said, I've kind of got I think it's called the personal statement success series or something like that. Let me try and find the link for you guys, so that you can kind of see. And then I will link that, because I don't think it's that easy to find. Here it is. Okay, let me link this in the chat. So this is a few kind of blog post that I wrote on the personal statement, which is just a good starting point. And obviously, it's free. And yeah, so that's what I'd say with that. I hope that was useful, a useful answer for you. Um, okay. So next one, did you do lots of work experience? So I did a slightly different work experience to what most people will have done. So I did like a standard kind of 2 weeks in a hospital, because my hospital's in Leicester, where I'm from. They do a kind of student scheme where people can sign up to do work experience. And then I also worked for about 18 months in a GP practice as actually a member of the kind of reception and admin team. And they were doing like a sort of scheme where they take on a student as a sort of someone to work as part of the team on a sort of apprentice wage. So it was less than minimum wage, but obviously it was a super good experience. It matured me a lot as a person, and I learned a lot of skills. Obviously that's quite kind of unique. That's not something that a lot of GPs will do. But as I said, the important thing is, it doesn't matter kind of how long your work experience is. What matters is actually what you gain from it. So if you're struggling to do work experience, and it's COVID times, universities understand it's very difficult. I would always recommend calling up or ideally visiting, but it might not be appropriate, but calling up your local GPs, pharmacies, dentists, hospitals, and kind of asking, do you do any kind of work experience scheme? Can I do anything online? Do you have any doctors who'd be willing to kind of talk to me for a bit, about the profession? Maybe, ask me some questions. You can maybe even put in a little bit of interview practice in there with them if they're willing. They're normally quite happy to help as long as it doesn't take up too much time. And for you, it'll be a really, really good experience because you know some work experience you'll be just kind of tagging along and not really learn anything from it, and it'll be super boring. But if you can have a kind of online discussion with a GP, for example, just one to one, going through the questions that you have, talking about your medical interests, that's a really, really valuable thing to have. So if you're struggling, definitely look at kind of online work experience, either kind of set up yourself, or things like, I think RCGP do one, and Brighton Sussex Medical School do one. So yeah, but I did a lot of work experience in terms of time commitment. But I did hospital and GP. I didn't do any volunteering. I didn't do kind of DAV or kind of care homes or anything like that. So that's for that bit. Will you be doing any surgeries focusing on other aspects, personal statement, BMAT interviews? I'm not sure what the plan is at the moment. I think because most of our questions last year were UCAT based, and obviously most medical students will do the UCAT. That's why we weren't entirely sure kind of how popular these would be this year, because normally it's done internally, but we've kind of opened it out. So I'm not sure. If there are, it may be with me, it may not be with me. But yeah, I'm sure there will be kind of, as things progress, obviously as we get closer to kind of interview season, that there will probably be some stuff on that. So yeah, keep an eye out. If you're on the kind of WhatsApp group, we'll kind of announce everything there, on the Discord server as well. If you want to sign up for that, then we'll kind of announce stuff there. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. Um, okay, I'm planning on taking gap year and reapplying. How much of my personal statement should I dedicate to my gap year plans? That's a really good question, and it's one of those annoying ones that there isn't really a correct answer to. I think it will ultimately depend on how much you do have planned and how much you have to talk about already. I would say, have a good sort of dedicated paragraph towards it, where you talk about what you've planned and what you're hoping to kind of get out of it. In that's the timer for questions. Yeah, so in terms of what you'll actually benefit from, and what you'll actually learn from it. Again, even though it's kind of prospective, even though it's in the future, you can still talk about what you're hoping to actually gain from it, what sort of value you're going to get, rather than just stating what you're going to do. If you have lots and lots to talk about already, then obviously you might want to shrink that down a bit. But I'd say definitely mention it, but don't let it kind of dominate your personal statement unless you don't really have too much to talk about. Okay, so we are going to come back to questions. So please keep kind of, putting your questions on there and upvoting ones as well. But we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. And we're going to go through, is this it? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go through some kind of tips for the verbal reasoning section and then on to the next question. So the first one is skimming, which is obviously quite sort of yeah, you can kind of see how important that is. And someone did ask me a question about how to get better at sort of speed reading. That's something that will definitely come with time. But the other thing is not needing to speed read necessarily by using kind of keywords. And so, not even looking at the paragraph when you get the question, just go straight to the question and then skim. And, if there's a good system you in terms of skimming, so maybe you read a couple of sentences really quickly, kind of pause and try and work out what it is and then read the next couple of sentences, or whether you just get better at sort of skimming through paragraphs in general. You can kind of get sort of online programs and things that kind of help in terms of speed reading. You can practice it with anything really. You can practice with your friends. You can kind of speed read things and then get people to answer questions on them. That's something that sometimes pops up in MMI stations as well, if you're doing any MMI, if you're applying to any MMI universities. So it's always good to try and develop some skills that can be used for more than one thing. But yeah, so that's an absolute key point. Looking for keywords, so especially things like qualifiers and absolutes. So qualifiers are things like, more likely, less likely, more often, these kind of things that can easily sort of try and trip you up. And then absolutes are things like never, always, biggest, these sorts of statements. So definitely look for those within the question statement. And then easy to spot keywords are things like acronyms, numbers, dates, proper nouns. So these are ones where you can easily kind of find them in the text, as opposed to just kind of general words like, I don't know, yeah, just sort of general words. And then timing. So it's a good idea to be aware. So if you split it up into 11 passages and you have 21 minutes, so you have depending on how much time you want to leave at the end, if any, you'll have maybe 1 minute 30 per kind of passage. So you'll need to know, okay, by the end of my third passage, I should be at this time point. By sort of halfway through, I should be at this time point. And that's something that you can kind of bear in mind as you do your practice questions. And then also when you actually do the actual kind of test as well. So as I said, the kind of best approach is to look for the keywords in the question, go to the passage, look for the keywords there, and then kind of read the sentences around it. If it's a question that talks about kind of inferring or agreeing with the author, these sorts of things, they tend to be more kind of difficult to use that technique with. So still, definitely look for the keywords, but you might have to actually read quickly and sort of interpret it a little bit as well. So if you kind of see those questions, I would say if you don't get the answer that quickly, that would be a case where in the exam you'd kind of guess one, flag it, and then move on, because there'll be easier questions coming up as well. But yes, I think the next question is now going to be up. So if you guys again get ready, get a piece of paper to write down your answers, and we're going to go through that again. I'll give you 2 minutes. I'll kind of switch the question after a minute, and then we'll go through the answers, and then we'll kind of finish off with a Q&A. So here's the second question. that is time. So yeah, that would be kind of, as I said, a little bit over the amount of time you'd get. And hopefully you managed to kind of put into practice some of the things I talked about, and also just got a little bit more familiar with the kind of setup. So we'll go through the answers. So the first one, so again, this is where they use the kind of sneaky terminology. So I'd look at this and think, okay, it's saying the most common criticism. So I'd probably look for criticism as a kind of keyword. And so you'd kind of skim through, find it in the first part of the second paragraph, and then you can see it mentions the lack of diversity. I'd also look for diversity as a keyword as well, by the way. Um, and so you see that first sentence says a criticism of the vegan diet is a lack of diversity, whereas the statement says the most common criticism. Now we don't know whether that's the most common. We just know it is a criticism. Um, if that statement were to say um, the most minor criticism of the vegan diet is a lack of diversity, or the least frequent criticism, then we could actually put this as false. However, it doesn't say kind of how common this is. It just says it is one, and therefore the answer is can't tell. And then with number two, so we're looking for correctly inferred. And again, the inference questions tend to be more difficult because you have to kind of process the information a bit more. But what I'd kind of go through here is, each of the statements, look for the keywords. And so I've kind of highlighted the bit that you'd sort of look for. So again, you're not using kind of prior knowledge here. You'd have to use what's in the passage. So with the first one, you kind of look for animal welfare, and you could see it sort of says many people adopt veganism for issues other than animal welfare. So we can't say A is correct. B, we can't really assess based on the information we're given, because it doesn't really talk about nutritional deficiencies of the critics. It says that critics say the vegan diet itself can give you nutritional deficiencies. C, the passage doesn't mention anything to do with vegetarians, and that's another thing they tend to do. They'll put a statement in where they'll mention something kind of new that's not really mentioned at any point. And these are normally quite easy to spot because you'll kind of read it and think, I don't remember anything about that. And you can normally just kind of move on straight from that. And then D, I've put the kind of bit that pertains to why D is correct. Another thing to remember, by the way, so this was kind of written, just in the style of the UCAT. So some of this information isn't actually kind of correct. So yeah, if anyone is a vegan, I'm not trying to be inflammatory. Number three, so this one was an easier question because it's just kind of related to single words. So hopefully you'll get lots of these in your actual exam. And so you just take kind of each of the answer options as a keyword, and you can see there it says an emphasis on micronutrients such as vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients, and so you can kind of take that as being the right answer. So hopefully most of you got that one right. And then number four, this is a very nasty question because it's more of it's a sort of negative type question. So it's saying least likely to agree with. This is one where I'd almost be tempted to kind of flag and guess and then skip this one in the exam if you kind of got one as nasty as this. But this is about as bad as it can get. So the answer for number four is D. Because essentially it's saying which one is not really a good conclusion you can make from the passage. And so D, you can see it doesn't really agree with what's been said because it's talked about, being better for the environment, potentially better for health, these kind of other aspects. And so that's why D is the correct one there. And if you kind of see the other statements, veganism is not completely accepted in current society. Well, you can see it talks about kind of critics of it. So the author would be likely to agree with A. B, again, it talks about, if veganism is to become the new norm, several changes must be overcome. So it's talking about, things that are kind of going to improve, and also is talking about veganism has expanded in the last few decades. So the author is likely to agree with B. C, there are incorrect criticisms. So again, it talks about a criticism is a lack of diversity, but then it goes on to say people who are vegans say that this isn't correct. So the author's likely to agree with C, and that's why by process of elimination you could get to D. So yes, hopefully that was useful for you guys, and you managed to kind of get some practice if you haven't done before. If you're the one or two people who said you're ready to do the section tomorrow, hopefully this was a similar kind of standard of question difficulty to what you've done, and I hope you got them all correct. And if not, then hopefully you kind of learned from that. So we're going to go back to the Q&A. Yeah, I will just say, in terms of kind of 6med in general, because I know people ask, what kind of things can 6med help with. So in terms of, sort of free things, obviously check out all of the social medias. So the Discord server, the WhatsApp group, Facebook. I think we're a little bit more present on Instagram now as well. And then obviously, check out the kind of free resources. So like the blog posts and that sort of thing, and then things like the question banks and the courses and the books and stuff tend to be super popular. So do kind of check those out if you kind of want more support. I think that the question banks are generally a very good idea because it's good to get that kind of level of practice in, and certainly something I wish that I had. So yes, I will go on to answer some questions for the final. I'll add a little bit more time because I started a bit late, so for the final sort of 5 minutes. And as I said, the slides and the recording will be available afterwards. So kind of you can go onto the website and find that. Maybe check tomorrow. So yeah, if you want to kind of go over the questions again. Okay, how long should I take to prepare for the UCAT, and what is the most effective way? I might do those two together. So the UCAT is definitely better to kind of break it up and spread it out over a longer period. Now, people talk about getting burnt out from kind of UCAT prep, and it can get quite overwhelming because it's kind of really short, sharp questions, and you're focusing for so long. And it's really kind of frantic, and it feels like it's going 100 miles an hour. But I think it's important to first of all, look at when you ideally want to do the UCAT. Now, I think the official UCAT people have recommended you do it kind of sooner rather than later. So if you're maybe thinking of doing it kind of August time, then that will tell you how long you have to prepare, and then factor in other things you might need to be doing, like BMAT revision or any schoolwork, any projects you've got going on, and you ideally want to spend sort of 2 or 3 months spreading out your preparation. And that includes going, right from the basics of just understanding what each of the sections are, what they're actually testing, what the actual kind of question types are sort of involved, and how they're going to ask them. What kind of knowledge do you need? So for something like abstract reasoning, there isn't really any kind of syllabus knowledge you need, but you need to know a general sort of algorithm for going through shapes. But for something like qualitative reasoning, you'll need to know some basic maths. So that sort of thing, and so that can take you maybe just a couple of weeks getting familiar with the absolute basics and the kind of layout of the exam, and then you want to start kind of going through your preparation. Make sure to do a few kind of practice tests, or at least do some questions at the start to gauge not only what level you're at, but also which sections you might be naturally better at compared to others. Because there usually are some where some people get sort of really high scores and some really low on the other. I was a bit weird, and I kind of was quite sort of equal on all of my sections, but that's not that common. And then so you want to spend a good kind of month getting that sort of fast progress in. So you'll start off not scoring very highly, but then as you start to understand the process behind the questions and kind of take it kind of slowly, then you'll be able to start scoring much higher. And then once you've kind of hit a natural kind of plateau, that's when you'll need to start working on timing. So actually becoming efficient, getting used to the interface, getting used to doing things like guessing the questions, discarding answers that are are obviously incorrect, kind of flagging and moving on, and those sorts of techniques, which are really important for, going from, say, a 700 to an 800, for example, or a 650 to a 750. And so that, again, I'd say, spending a good sort of month on that. And then, by the time you kind of got to that place where now your scores are still kind of going up, that you should maybe be, a couple of weeks away from your exam, and then it's just about kind of cruising to the test date. Making sure you're doing questions regularly. If you come across a question that you get wrong, taking time to understand what your thought process was, why it was incorrect, and what you should have done, and kind of working that way. And that's probably the best approach. And that whole process, if you're not kind of cramming and not spending 6 hours a day doing prep, which I'd never really recommend, that should take kind of a few months. Some people say that they prefer doing it in a much shorter period. Some people say they spent 2 weeks on it, or 3 weeks, or a month. I personally think it's better to spread it out, but ultimately, I think what works best for you is what you should kind of go with. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers those two questions. Someone's asking about signing up for the WhatsApp group or the Discord server. So the Discord server, I think you can probably just search for it on Google. I think I was sent I was sent a link. In terms of the WhatsApp group, so there is an invite link, but I would suggest if you email team@sixmed.co.uk and ask to be added to the WhatsApp group. There's lots of discussions there, lots of great students who kind of talk about the application in general. And then with the Discord server, I think you can either search for it, or if I stop share, I'll need to go on my WhatsApp. And probably shouldn't broadcast personal stuff to you guys. Let me get that link for you. And so I personally haven't really used Discord that much until quite recently, because SixMed have started to kind of use it. But I think students find it really useful to have that kind of interface. So let me just find that. Here it is. Okay, and let me just pop it in the chat. Okay, so I've put the link there for the Discord server. For the WhatsApp group, let me see if I can put the link for that in there as well. Okay, and here's the link for the WhatsApp group. So yeah, hopefully that works. As I said, it's a good community of people. I think people find it very useful. So yeah, that's that one. So I think, unfortunately, that's about time. So I'd suggest, that there are some good questions there, actually. And if you kind of do have questions, the kind of burning questions, you can either wait until the next surgery, which will be in, I think, about 2 weeks, or feel free to email team@sixmed.co.uk. Otherwise, I hope you guys have found this useful. As I said, the kind of slides and recordings will be available. But yeah, this was designed as just kind of an introduction to the section, and to get you kind of familiar with the sort of format and what it looks like, and some of the tips that you probably won't find in too many other places. So for some reason, not many people kind of talk about that kind of stuff. But yeah, I hope you found it useful, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you guys very soon.